What's up, y'all? It's your boy JTMM, aka JustTenMoreMinutes, aka the Freakin 10. We're back again with another Sabaton history, and this is another one. I haven't recorded the button yet that says I want to see the history, but it's coming. With every song that they do, you're just intrigued. They pull you in, right? I said that every video, but it holds true every video. Every song just kind of pulls you in where you're just like, okay, what's this about? And it's probably, I don't even want to say it's a marketing ploy. It's just how they write their music. It pulls you in, you want to know more. And if they did it for marketing purposes, well, then they're absolutely freaking geniuses. But I think truly the music is at their heart, and the history is just that added bonus of it to where they get to tell this other story, right? And that's where indie comes in. Now, I see Kim talking first. Wonder what they're up to. Normally it's indie, but we'll see. That being said, let's switch it up. Let's check it out.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Joachim from Sabaton.
And this is Sabaton History.
I rest my case.
The modern sniper came from World War I.
And our song, Ghost in the Trenches, is about the greatest sniper of the Great War.
Raid after raid, men charge straight into the fire, laying their lives down for a few feet of ground. It is a costly and destructive tactic. Some men have found out that a single shot can be more efficient than a hail of bullets when directed from a sniper's sight. Like ghosts, they sweep across the trenches with deadly precision.
The modern concept of the sniper, like so many other concepts of modern war, was born during the Great War, more or less from day one in 1914. Now, there had, of course, been soldiers tasked with skillfully taking out the enemy before that. In fact, the English term sharpshooter dates back to the Napoleonic Wars and appears in print for the first time in an article in the Edinburgh Advertiser from 1801. That, in turn, seems to be a literal translation of the German Scharfschütze that dates back to at least 1781. You see, the Bavarians and Austrians of the time are already deploying skilled hunters to take out selected individuals in the enemy line. Given the range and quality of their front-loaded guns and the nature of war being mostly advancing formations over open ground, they're still doing this pretty much in direct sight, though. It's the development of better guns, and more importantly, better scopes, that enables the terrifying sudden death from far, far away by a single shot. And in 1914, the Germans pioneer the improved tactic by, again, employing skilled hunters, now equipped with strong binoculars and high-precision sights. Although their guns are at first of average quality, ranging effectively roughly 300 meters, they are soon equipped with the Mauser G98 rifle with a 1 kilometer or about 3,000-foot effective range. As hunters, they are not only skilled shots, though, but also experts in patiently waiting out their enemy from a camouflaged position.
That's the fascinating part of this, is going back that far, right? Sharpshooter. And I'm sure, obviously, from a human perspective, we were hunters and gatherers, right? Long before this, and people were on farms and hunting their own meals. But then taking it into a war setting, with those sharpshooters, and I mean, going from 300 meters of 900 feet to 1 kilometer, right? Which was, I forget the exact translation between kilometers and miles. A mile is 5,280 feet. And I think a kilometer is give or take around there. But think about that difference, right? Going from 900 feet, and I'm sure there may have been weapons in between that may have extended that a little bit before they just jumped to the kilometer. But man, still today, it's fascinating to think about how far, right, from 3,000 feet or 1,000 feet or any of those, given wind trajectory, clear line of sight, all of those things, it just makes it that much more fascinating on the techniques that are used in order to get that kill shot, right? What makes it even more interesting to me is going back in time, to Simo, um, and to Francis now, of moving around like that during these times, and being able to take them out, and not be seen. Now, Francis, not as much because he's going from trench to trench, right? So, obviously they had an idea of where it was coming from a trench perspective. And that's what makes Simo's just that much more impressive. But still, just the sheer amount, right? 397, I think, for Francis and 500 for Simo. That's just insane to me.
As the war bogs down into the trenches, these killers soon become a feared and very effective threat. At the time, an average German sniper racks up 40 kills before he is unlucky enough to have his position vaguely estimated so he can be eliminated by a barrage of artillery shells coming down on him and anything that happens to be anywhere near him. With a 40-to-1 kill rate, it doesn't take long for the Allies to copy the German tactic, so that most units in the trenches on both sides are accompanied by one or several sharpshooters with long-range guns, precision scopes, trained in the art of camouflage, lightning-fast visual analysis, and extreme gun accuracy. Men that will have to leave the relative safety of the trenches, crawl into no man's land, or even sneak into or behind the enemy lines to deliver death and gather intelligence. You need a special kind of man to do that kind of work, to have even a remote chance of survival. And Francis Pegamagaba was exactly the right man for that job. He was indeed remarkable in many ways. To start with, he was a Canadian Aboriginal, which meant that he was treated as a second-class citizen in his own country, or rather, not a citizen at all, as Canada at the time did not grant citizenship to people of tribal native descent. It's unclear on what exact date he was born, but it was sometime around March 8, 1889, on a reservation now known as Shawanga First Nation. The newborn Francis is discovered next to his dead mother, who has apparently died giving birth to him. He grows up in an adopted family, who are part of the Parry Island Band, now the Wasauksing First Nation. Eventually, he makes his living working on the Great Lakes and as a musician in a band. While a sailor, he's given a small leather pouch as a protective talisman, and the story goes that his belief in its protective powers is what will soon propel him to superhuman feats on the battlefields of France.
I had to stop there because and the reason why you heard me kind of go, is my birthday is March 7th, and I was adopted. It always gets me when there's someone around that, and then you talk about musician, songwriter. I'm actually fairly decent with a weapon. Now, I'm not a sniper by any means, but I'm a pretty good shot. But wow, okay.
But when you look at his whole life story and how he seems to have overcome extreme adversity from the very first day of his life, it's more likely that the talisman only reinforced a natural ability to face danger, adventure, and adversity with almost nonchalant resolve.
But that's I laugh because that's just there's a lot of people in this Pisces realm, whether you believe in the astrological signs or not. Just the history, if you really go look at it, if you're a Pisces, go look at the astrological sign and see if it applies to you. For me, it does. And when you talk about things like the adventure and having just that different outlook on things, for me, it's that same view. Yes, do I get that emotional response? But at the end of the day, it's why I do what I do for a living with business process improvement and business engagement and such, is because I don't view a lot of things as huge tasks. It's here's the facts, here's what we can do, let's do it, right? And so you do kind of approach it as a nonchalant and don't make a big deal. Inside, yes, you may have emotional reactions to things. That's common human nature. But on the outside, you can seem calm and collected and just a different breed of cat. So it actually makes a lot of sense to me.
And then the war breaks out. The recruiters of the Canadian Army are not really that keen on enlisting men from the native tribes, even turning away volunteers at times. But Francis has his eyes firmly set on joining the war and enlists immediately. By August 20th, 1914, Francis Pega-Magabo is heading for Valcartier, Quebec, the training base for Canadian soldiers bound for Europe. Soon he's in England, and in February 1915 arrives in France to train trench war tactics in the Ypres salient. Immediately when deployed at the actual front, 2 months later, he's confronted with the first German gas attacks. Now, arriving in the trenches, one of which you see behind me, was by any standards a shocking experience. The constant fear of death from artillery fire, snipers, mines, bombardment from the sky, and then there was the all-out hellish experience of going over the top to face the enemy's wall of gunfire. Most soldiers did what they had to do to survive and follow orders. Many soldiers broke down or were killed before they could even decide what to do. And then there were a few men like Francis Pega-Magabo that seemingly found themselves at home and went far beyond the call of duty at immense personal risk. It turns out that Francis has an uncanny skill of being able to slip through and between the trenches unnoticed. His eyesight is exceptional and his marksmanship is excellent, so he's assigned as the battalion sniper. Now, snipers in this war are also used to run messages between headquarters in divided trenches, gather intelligence close to the enemy line, and carry out other dangerous missions in no man's land. But Pega-Magabo seems to be seeking out immediate personal danger as a thrill. At night, he sneaks into the German trenches to stand silently beside the enemy watch posts, just to slip away again unnoticed. He even enters the sleeping quarters of the German soldiers to cut off pieces of the uniforms they're actually wearing as they sleep. Now let that sink in for a bit.
You know, and I'll rewind it just for a second, because I'm thinking about the psychological piece of this, and I'll give you a frame of reference. Take a look at Bull, right? Leslie Bull Allen, and being adopted, and that sense of belonging and things like that. And here you've got now Francis, also adopted. Now he was put into a different family and raised, but there's a mentality there, right? And that is that, you know, kind of like Leslie, putting yourself out there for the sake of doing what you can to not abandon and leave anybody behind. Now you have Francis, where you're talking about someone that now puts themselves out there with that same thing. And again, it's just a personality. It's just a trait from that. And I do stand behind that. You know, a lot of times I say that's just my opinion, and I'll stand behind it, just having gone through that and understanding what being adopted can do to you mentally. And not saying it's a bad thing. Don't take it that way. But there is that underlying sense of what that does to you and how that can translate into this type of soldier if it's triggered the right way. Now, with all that being said, I identify with a lot of them until you get to the excellent eyesight. But, you know, it's fascinating to me, that psychological side, to see, you know, there's two individuals that went into, you know, Leslie went into the orphanage and Francis was adopted in this other family, and how that translates into the war. That part's fascinating to me.
Wearing as they sleep. Now let that sink in for a bit. The place he is in is possibly the closest to actual hell on earth that you or anyone can imagine. It's muddy, dirty, loud, and lethal. You're under constant threat from mortars, machine guns, patrols, and defense works. Everywhere around you, there is death and destruction. If you do not succumb to the fighting, chances are you will catch disease in the close, unhygienic quarters. And it is the smell of all of this that stays the longest in the memories of the men who suffered in the trenches. It is the odor of thousands of men living at close quarters. Their feces and urine, rotting food, molding cloth and decaying wood, the smell of sulfur, carbon, saltpeter, and other chemicals from the fighting. And most significantly, the overpowering stench of rotting flesh from the thousands of dead that lay unburied in no man's land.
I'll rewind it again. You know, that's something that I was thinking about when they first showed the trenches that I hadn't thought about in previous videos is the smell of death. You know, take the you know, gunpowder and, you know, things like that, but then you think about things like, you know, them going to the restroom, or, you know, just being unwashed for a while, but then you add in that smell of death. That's what makes each one of these just absolutely, these men just phenomenal with what they went through. And I don't use that term to say, oh, they were great, but you think about the situations they were put in and they survived, and some of them thrived, you know, and to be around that, you know, and you think about PTSD and what these people saw and had to deal with. I can only imagine that smell sitting with them. I mean, you think about police today and homicide investigators just from a law enforcement perspective, and that's one of the reoccurring things that they always talk about is just that smell of you know, death and how that affects them, and they know that smell. So you think about these guys in that extreme situation. It's just mind-boggling. My heart goes out to them, you know, and that's where the service comes in. You know, yes, a lot of it was voluntary, some not voluntary, in some wars, in some locations, etc. But the things they saw, and still the servicemen today see in some wars and battles that they face, man, heart breaks.
Flesh from the thousands of dead that lay unburied in no man's land. And in this apocalyptic world, Francis navigates silently, unseen and seemingly untouchable. He is truly a ghost in the trenches. As 1915 passes into 1916, he continues to restlessly stalk his enemy. His incredible service doesn't go unnoticed. On August 26, 1915, he is promoted to Lance Corporal. Now, that's not an unremarkable thing considering his actions, but it is a remarkable thing when you consider his origins. Remember, back home, he's not even a Canadian citizen. But the war is the great equalizer. Soldiers are rated by their peers and superiors on their courage under fire and their actions in battle. Lance Corporal Francis Pegamagabo's service is impeccable, and in March 1916, he is recommended for the Distinguished Conduct Medal. He carried messages with great bravery and success during the whole of the action at Ypres, Festubert, and Givenchy. In all his work, he has consistently shown a disregard for danger, and his faithfulness to duty is highly commendable. Although he does not receive this, the second highest award for gallantry in the British Army, he is part of the first group of 78 Canadian soldiers awarded the military medal. He himself believes that he is protected by the spirits, and until the end of 1916, this seems to be true, but eventually, even Francis gets touched by reality. It's a leg wound that will keep him out of action for many months well into 1917. Most soldiers would welcome this opportunity to stay away from the war for a bit, but Francis is not most soldiers, and he wants back to the front. At first, they will not let him, but he starts a campaign of letter writing to convince his superiors to return him to active duty, and he's back in the front lines by May. The ghost in the trenches continues haunting the German lines throughout the summer of 1917, and in the fall he fights at Passchendaele. Here he is again commended for his exceptional work maintaining contact with units on the flanks and for guiding lost relief units, earning him his second military medal. But by now, the war is starting to take a toll, even on Francis. Try to imagine it. By now, his short stay in the hospital accepted, he's been fighting more or less constantly for close to 3 years. He has taken sight of hundreds of enemy soldiers through his scope, enlarged enough so that he can see their facial features, maybe even the last light in their eyes just before he kills them with a shot to the head. Surely he did what most soldiers do, justify it to himself with the lives he saved on his own side. Most certainly he must have had a capacity to compartmentalize and objectify the enemy to cope with the killing. Probably he was able to overcome the stress by an unusual love for adrenaline kicks, but for how long can you keep that up? And how long can your body sustain this pressure?
You know, put it in perspective, right? I mean, we all do things in our lives that we justify, right? No matter what the cost is, right? We get something in our sights, we want it, and you know, it's that saying of at all cost, right? But it really, that saying is not at all cost, it's but at what cost, right? And that's where, to me, I mean, you know, there's definitely been things in my past that I would not do if the situation was presented to me. You know, nothing of this nature, obviously, but I've never been put into this situation. But you think about that even on the smaller scale. You know, whether as a kid, you know, who as a kid maybe didn't, you know, steal a piece of candy, right? And, you know, you think about the justification of it. Well, I want it. I don't have money, but I want it, right? But I want it. And yes, you don't compare stealing candy to death, but you think about on a smaller scale of all those things that you've justified, and now you put it into this sense. But now if you think back to that and how much you regret some of those choices that you've made and those what ifs of what if I didn't do that? What if I didn't do that? And that's kind of where my mind goes, is thinking about these guys in the military that, you know, like Christmas truce, you know, where they saw these guys and talked to them and they just couldn't do it. Of how long in your head as a sniper could you continually look at these guys and just say, you're the enemy, you're the enemy, you're the, and obviously, you know, he's got a high kill number at the final tally, but mentally, yeah, how do you do that? I don't know. That's what makes these guys just so unique.
You keep that up, and how long can your body sustain this pressure? The answer for Francis is 3 years. At Christmas time, he is diagnosed with pneumonia and sent into convalescence until May 1918. But he returns to service, working through the summer of 1918. By now, he is showing signs of what in 2019 would be called post-traumatic stress disorder. He's becoming insubordinate and gets cited for disciplinary problems. But he continues service over the summer, sniping and running messages at, among others, the Second Battle of Arras, where he earns the second bar on his military medal. This is his commendation. During the operations on August 30th, 1918 at Oryx Trench near Upton Wood, when his company were almost out of ammunition and in danger of being surrounded, this NCO went over the top under heavy machine gun and rifle fire and brought back sufficient ammunition to enable the post to carry on and assist in repulsing heavy enemy counterattacks. But Francis is now more of a ghost of himself than anything else. And by early November, he is sent to England suffering exhaustion psychosis. When only days later the war ends, he is discharged back to Canada. He ends the First World War as one of only 37 Canadian soldiers to receive 2 bars on his military medal, and is the most highly decorated Aboriginal soldier in Canadian history. He is credited with 378 sniper
Oh,
kills,
378.
which is more than anyone else from any country in the First World War. And he captured over 300 prisoners. Numbers that make it easy to understand that, like every man and woman who served at or near the front, he returns changed forever. But true to his nature, Francis, although changed, is not broken. He has experienced acceptance as an equal from men serving by his side in battle, and then returns to Canada, where he is everything but equal. He begins a lifelong struggle for full citizenship and equal rights for Aboriginal Canadians. He serves 2 tenures as chief of the Parry Island Band and continues his involvement with the armed forces by joining the local militia regiment, the 23rd Pioneers, where he serves as company sergeant major from 1930 to 1936. Francis Pegamagabo dies August 5, 1952, and is buried on the Wasauksing First Nation, close to where he was born. Like many of the rest of his generation, he took the suffering of war that he had endured and inflicted and turned it towards changing the world to the better. Born a non-desirable orphan, he is today, 100 years after his service, recognized in Canada as an important part of Canadian military history, with the 3rd Canadian Ranger Patrol Group named in honor of Corporal Francis Pegamagabo. To his allies, he was a hero and at times a savior. To his enemies, he was swift death. To all of us, he should be an example of how terribly personal war is.
Yeah, that'll get you right there. You know, but it's not sadness. It's proud because, and pride, because you think about the choices that he had. You return from war. I've referenced this several times, but the lyrics from Poison, Something to Believe In, you know, and it references more of Vietnam, but, you know, you fought I think it was a losing war on a foreign shore, but his country didn't want him back. And when he came back, his country didn't recognize him. This is a guy that put his freaking life on the line, and he had to come back and fight to even be recognized. But again, those blinders, this is what I want, this is what should be, and he fought for it. And that just, the well-deserved, you know, in the military history part, it is so well-deserved. It's just, it's how one person can change the world. And that's, I hate to, please don't take this as me being arrogant or anything like that, but that's how I've felt before I started this channel, was that I was always destined for something bigger than what I was accomplishing. And I don't mean that in the sense of I'm this great, you know, being, but it's one of those things where it's just that gut feeling. It's like, this doesn't complete what I want to accomplish. This doesn't complete me. And feeling like you can have a bigger impact on things. And that's what I've felt since being introduced to, you know, streaming and video and such. And so for me, maybe it's just that whole thing of going back to the adoption and that personality and that acceptance. Maybe that's what it boils down to. No clue. But it's just, that's what it's always felt like. And so I 100%, you know, on a smaller scale compared to what he went through, I get it. And that's, it's a drive. It's a passion to follow your dreams on how one person can change the world. And when you change the world, it doesn't have to be for 1,000 people, 1,000,000 people. Changing the world is for someone else. If you affect one person or 5 people, you've changed the world. So keep that in mind. Don't think that you have to go make these these just exorbitant tasks to change the world. Change in the world starts with yourself and what you do and what it can influence others, because that, for every action there is a reaction. So don't think about it as you have to go accomplish this big thing to be successful and change the world. You change the world with every task that you do. So if you put your best foot forward, you've made a difference.
Under fire, a ghost that rules the battlefield. Move between the lines, a soldier breaking the confines.
And now over to our roving reporters, Indy Nidell and Joachim from Sabaton at Verdun.
Thanks, Indy. Thanks, Joachim. Yes, that's right. We are here in the trenches, in some actual World War I
Freaking
trenches.
goofballs.
Joachim, over to you.
Well, at the end of every album production, when we're writing the lyrics and everything, there's always one or two songs left that we can't find the perfect story for. For us, it's really important that the music and the lyrics match.
That's cool.
And this song, really, we couldn't find anything until you came to our rescue.
Me?
Yes, we were actually a bit desperate.
Okay.
And we were scouring the internet. We came across an amazing episode on the Great War about Francis Pegamogabo, a ghost in the trenches.
Of course, the hero of Ghost in the Trenches. Yeah, if you don't know, my first big YouTube series was The Great War. You should go and check it out. So, well, I'm glad I could be an inspiration to you guys.
Yes, it was lovely.
See, we
That's
work
awesome.
together. We complement each other.
That
and
is
now,
awesome.
back to you, Indy and Joachim.
Thank you, roving reporters Indy Nidell and Joachim from Sabaton, and we are back in the studio.
Goofballs. I love seeing them have fun like that, though.
Okay, Ghost in the Trenches, Francis Pegamogabo.
It was one of the first songs to be written for the album, actually the first one, and the first one featuring Tommy as a songwriter. So I wrote that with him.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And this one, I actually started, I don't remember, it started with a Googling or something. And that's when I knew this is a song, because this is a, sorry for the language, what the fuck moment. How have I not heard about this? And I gotta say, you did a great job on the research, because what was available online, at least when I tried to find some, there wasn't much.
And cool that Tommy got a credit for that and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously he comes from, bands where he's been the main songwriter and singer and keyboard player and guitarist at the same time.
Yeah.
So we already knew that, he's perfectly capable of writing songs, but we didn't know if we were gonna, be able to write songs together, because sometimes, different songwriting styles don't really match. But
And I always hate cutting off Joachim. I'll rewind it. But that is so true, because people write differently. And I found that out, in writing in that previous time when I was doing that. And I never really thought about that, in the sense of like a Sabaton, right? Of the writing styles. But that is a really cool freaking story. I really like that, because yeah, we see what Tommy does right on his own. And yet, in a lot of the credits, we don't see his name. And so it always I guess it never, for me personally, just because of how I move from video to video, I don't necessarily always have time to think in the moment of, Tommy's so gifted here, why has he not written more here? Because I think of him as individuals, right? So, because when I watch these, I'm not thinking of, you've got Per and you've got Joachim and you've got Tommy, and then you have the other members, which I honestly haven't looked to see, of how much input they have, right? And then you think about Tommy on his own. Yeah, just never thought about it like that, but that's a cool little story.
songs together, because sometimes, different songwriting styles don't really match. But in this case, I guess you'll be hearing more from me and Tommy.
And here's another bizarre little bonus. When we were filming the stuff at Verdun, I went down to the hotel bar, and Tommy was just playing on the piano and stuff. And there were a couple of journalists there, and they asked us to play a song together. And I don't know how it came up with this, but one of the journalists recorded it, so I guarantee we can put a piece of it here. This is me and Tommy doing Frosty the Snowman. completely unreheartsed.
Exclusive on Sabaton History.
Yeah.
Frosty the Snowman is a fairy tale, they say. He was made of snow, but the children know how he came to life one day. There must have been some magic in that old silk hat they found, 'cause when they placed it on his head, he began to dance around.
All right, everyone. Remember to
just
support us on
freaking great.
Patreon, because that's what makes this show happen, actually. And there's a playlist. Cool shit. You want that. And also, don't forget to check out Time Ghost and World War II. And I hope to see you again very soon. Take care.
You know, Andy does have that kind of unique voice that in presentation, he's a character in himself, right? It's cool to see that. I do wonder how many drinks that may have been taken to get to that. But it's funny because you see Tommy just kind of being not serious per se, but you know, you could see he was like very focused, which is, it's Tommy, right? That's just, he lives and breathes this stuff. But that was a cool little thing. Going back to the story, you know, yes, there's so many untold stories, and this is what they bring to light that just amazes me, right? Let me switch it up. I'll give you my final thoughts. I wanted to pause there and actually bring it back to the closing thoughts with what I was saying, because there are so many untold stories, and you kind of heard him, right? Credit Indy, because they heard Indy talking about it and they're like, how? But I've said this about multiple of their songs. It's like, how is this not a worldwide story? And this is where it's sad of how many of these stories go untold because the blinders that we put on, that's specific maybe just to our country, right? And not understanding how, and using it as motivations for the children of tomorrow and for the leaders of tomorrow. That's what I meant to say. Stories of inspiration. Now, not all the stories are inspiring, right? There's a lot of evil that's gone on that we've, covered. But for these stories, just about that adversity of growing up, which could be applied in so many freaking ways today, to give these kids that feel like they don't have a belonging, that they don't have a bright future because of whatever their situation is, and show them the stories of people like Leslie Allen, people like Francis Peggy-Magabo. Hey, I did that pretty quickly and off the cuff. That was pretty good. And just how those two people took it and changed the world, right? You could go back to the decisions that we make when No Bullets Fly. And that, I mean, all of these stories can be used. That's what pisses me off the most, is that these stories that could be used as inspiration, if taught correctly, are not told because of the fear of what the entire war, the image of war and death and all that, when that's just a freaking reality of life and death. Move past that and use these stories to inspire people to be the best they could be. I could go on and on, but that just irritates the shit out of me. Another amazing story, another amazing song. More to come. I think it's Flanders Field. I don't remember the exact title, but that's coming on tomorrow. And then, of course, I'll cover the history on Thursday. So with that being said, that's going to do it for me on this one. No notifications and all that. I've kind of moved away from doing that a lot. Y'all know what to do. Like, subscribe, share. If you want to support me for getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and filming a lot of this and then working a full day, hey, you can. Buymeacoffee.com/JTMMTV. You can go check it out. It's always appreciated, but never required. The like, subscribe, share. That's seeing that and seeing the numbers continuously grow every week and just hitting these little milestones of what I wanted to accomplish. Y'all make me happy with that. It really does. And then the comment section, of course. So I appreciate y'all. Look forward to the comment section on this. Y'all know what to do. All of that stuff. You know who I am. I'm out.